Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and this show, I have to tell you, we kind of scheduled several months ago with the intention of having it in the dead of winter. And it is appropriately a show talking about death from a lot of different viewpoints. And my guest tonight is the local author, Mathew Braunstein. He's been on the show before talking about some of his other books.
Twice before.
Yeah.
But not with you the first time.
Yeah, talking about drug policy.
Medical marijuana specifically, yeah.
Yeah, way back before it was legal.
Probably 1999, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you, I don't know, well, before we really get started on this subject, I'll ask you, were you the first legal medical marijuana user in Connecticut?
I was the first to come out of the closet. I came out of the closet in 1997, wrote an editorial which was published on the front page of the Sunday editorial section of the Hartford Courant. And all three, at that time there were only 3 TV stations in the network, and all 3 came to my door and interviewed me, put me on TV, showed them my stash. That's my notoriety back then.
And you went on to testify many times before the state legislature.
7 times in person, and 1 time written testimony of the 8 times that the bill came up. So in other words, I participated all the times, yeah.
So the theme of tonight's show, Mark recently wrote a book called Final Thoughts, One Mortal's Quest to Laugh at Death, or A Beginner's Guide to Death. And we're going to talk about the book and also about, the implications of it. So I guess I'll ask you, what motivated you to write a book on this subject?
I'll give you a quick bibliography leading up to it. The first book I wrote was Radical Vegetarianism, published in '81. It was radical because it was veganism. It was the first book of its kind espousing it, considered radical then. It's a book about not just fruits and vegetables, but life and death. Then I wrote Sprout Garden, Microgreen Garden. They're about fruits and vegetables. Easy stuff. Then I wrote Good Girls and Bad Drugs, which is drugs, sex, and life and death. Mostly death.
Yeah,
half of them died before the book was even published. And I've learned of 1 more that died since publication. But anyway, so why all of a sudden just on death? Well, the first 3 books I wrote were published by real publishing houses. The 4th book, I looked for a publisher, didn't find. I published it myself. I developed all the skills I needed to do book design. I mastered, for book design anyway, Adobe InDesign. And I already knew Adobe Photoshop. So I did the cover, did the layout. Book was published, and I figured, why don't I write a book about death without even looking for a publisher, since I already have all the skills I need, since I've been writing about it all my life anyway. Half of the book is journal entries that I just revised for this, and the other half were brand new. So I figured, not looking for a publisher, I'm going to publish a book myself just the way I want it. Nobody's going to read it. I don't care. And that's exactly what I did.
And I'm just now looking at the one you have on the table, that its category is philosophy, humor, although it isn't all humorous.
No, but there's humor in it.
There is.
I think so. I may have a warped sense of humor, maybe called gallows humor. but that's the way
Quite
I've always
literally.
been. Yeah.
So maybe we can talk a little bit, since you put it together, talk a little bit about how the book is structured and, like, you know, what order things are in. And we have a real book here. We have a cover, and I actually have the book, but we also have some slides so you can see some of the illustrations.
Which are the frontispieces of each chapter, which is exactly what relates to your question, how is the book structured? Well, each chapter is one's aphorisms, one's just stories from my real life, others just made-up tales. Another is pieces of art, like whether the paintings, music, or literature, where they've affected me very dearly, and they just happen to be some things about death, so I put it together that way, including illustrations of the paintings. One is about my suicide attempt. It's in there. Look, it's
clearly unsuccessful.
I'm a failure, what can I say? My father said I'd always be a failure in life.
Although I'm not sure you proved that, but so far failure in death, perhaps.
Right. That's true. And then the last chapter is about walking, which I'm an authority, since unlike everyone else listening in or viewing, who learned to walk and forgot about it because they learned it's in infants, I remembered the actual steps of learning how to walk because I became paraplegic in 1990 and took a year to get up on crutches again, and I've been on crutches ever since.
And so the book story, I have the back cover next. And I don't know if we should talk about the back cover yet.
Last.
Or we'll talk about it last. I have to tell everyone, I told you already, that when you sent these photos to me, like, oh my God, they're all skulls.
But that's the book. That's the frontispiece of each chapter in the book, yeah. That's the theme.
So the first part, parables and fables.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just say something. Why skulls? Because in Western art history, probably Eastern to an extent, there's this theme called vanitas, otherwise in Latin, memento mori. It's a theme from particularly the 17th century, and especially Belgian, Flanders, Dutch art. Vanitas is a still life, but there's always a skull in it, and that's to remind us of the fleeting nature of life, okay? And it could be a candle that's almost down to the out, or maybe just snuffed out. But that skull is always a part of a vanitas. That's by definition, has to be a skull in there. It's a theme that's very, very rich in Western art, but specifically what I've just mentioned. So that's why these skulls are such easy pickings from art history, because they're all over the place in art history. Okay?
So most of us don't really think about like the skulls lurking around the corner all the time. Do you think there's something about what artists need to express that makes them, I don't know, keep the skulls a little nearer to them?
You know, there's that scene in Hamlet when he comes upon the grave site of Yorick.
Yeah.
And, well, actually, it's Yorick's grave being unearthed for whatever reason. I guess maybe they ran out of space. They had to make a new plot or whatever. And there's a skull, and he's holding it. And alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. Everyone knows the line.
Yeah.
Well, that's just part of our art is that skull. I mean, it's part of us, of course. We all know that. But it's a reminder. It's memento mori. It's just Latin for remember. You're going to die, man, dude.
Yeah.
So everything else you're going to do in life is just, futile to say that, unless we confront the ephemerality of life's existence, we are just kidding ourselves.
Although in a certain way, the artists are leaving something behind maybe more than many of us. I mean,
a painting
some
of
of
a
these
skull.
paintings, yes,
Yeah.
I mean, are still remembered hundreds of years later at a time when, like, no one who actually personally knew the artist has been alive for generations. So I don't know if it makes people feel, I'm not an artist at all, so
Well,
I don't know.
That's just to answer your query about the skulls. So you want to forward some of the other?
Sure.
Okay. So chapters
Okay.
2 and 3, that's a Van Gogh on the right. And
Oh,
it's-
yeah?
Yeah, it's been used as an anti-smoking campaign poster, but that's Van Gogh who actually put a cigarette into that. It's not just a skull, it's actually upper torso as well. So
And with the cigarette.
with a cigarette, yeah. He knew what was coming on. You know, it's amazing how smoking and cancer took 200 years to link the two. It took 40 years of research before it's finally published in the 60s to link the two. So, I mean, Van Gogh already knew that.
Yeah, like over 100 years
Yeah.
beforehand. And then,
Chapters 4 and 5. Okay.
and let's see, and 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And of course, 7 is isn't just skulls. It's
No,
it's
but
the
it's
journey.
walking. The reason why, because of walking to our graves, those three figures are actually the same. Well, the first two figures are actually the same person walking to her grave. A woman as a young woman, as an old woman, and then death looking over it all. So they're on a march, a procession.
And then, well, and the end, I guess, is always fairly near with
Yes.
us mere mortals.
The end is near, and in the book it says below it, no, the end is here, because it's the last page of the book. So, this is all filled with humor, I think. It's my weird sense of humor. I had a great time writing the book. I enjoyed every moment of it. And once finished and published, I don't think about death anymore. I've got it all out.
But I'm thinking, having read it, that you thought about death quite a bit beforehand.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, about half of the passages were extracted from my journals and rewritten for the book, yeah.
And I think fairly recently you presented a program related to food and,
Vegetarianism in art. There was a slideshow that I created, yeah.
And I'm guessing that one of your reasons for veganism is related to, animal life.
Life and death, that's what I
Yeah.
mentioned. The first book is about, it's not just fruits and vegetables, it's about life and death, yes.
So in this book, okay, let's see, Parables and Fables, are there any particular fables that you really like better than the
first
others?
One, the first one, that's why I put it, the first one.
Do you want to read part of it?
No, you read it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
the
that's
one
why I
that's
get paid the big bucks.
On a
right?
rock, am I correct? That's the first one? On a rock?
Wait a second, am I at the right place? Like, Parables and Fables,
The first one is on a rock.
the Rock,
Okay.
Rock of Ages.
Rock of Ages, yeah.
Rocked
Okay.
by the ages of rocks. On an immense rock upon a shore, someone had inscribed, "Love will make you forget death." The spot became a favorite meeting place for lovers because they believed it. And during so many dawns, arm in arm, they watched the sunrise while they forgot about death. Then beneath that single sentence, someone scribbled another one, "Death will make you forget love." After that, few people visited that rocket anymore. Those solitaries who did venture forth were the unrequited and the betrayed, the suicidal and the forlorn, and the widowed and the divorced. Because they believed in nothing, they watched the sun set there while they hoped to forget about love. Then one day, both inscriptions disappeared. Either the sea had washed the graffiti off the rock, or the rock had washed away into the sea.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I put you on the spot telling you to read it. So
Yeah.
you did well.
Yeah, it's and I think all throughout the life, the book, the idea of like the duality, love and death, life and death. And there are
Love and death is a theme throughout Western art as well, of course, yeah. I mean, in Wagner's Liebestod, means love death, from Tristan und Isolde, how two beings wanted to become one so much that the only way they could really do it is to die, like Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but then after death, you forget about love, right? So, I don't know. So at what point in your life did you start really thinking about death? I mean,
When my parakeet first died, this is my first-hand experience, seeing it with my own eyes, live one day, and then the next morning, dead on the floor. It's my first introduction. I'm sure we all have some sort of an introduction like that, very often with our family pets, because they have much shorter lives than humans, so probably more of them in our lives have died before us.
yeah, my family, I don't know, did not have pets much. We had a short sequence of goldfish, and that was about.
And they die very quickly if you don't take care of them right.
Yes,
Especially if you don't oxygenate the water.
We were not good at it.
Yeah,
My family was city folks, and we didn't do pets well. But I do remember as a child, there were a couple of, very young people on the block that died when I was a kid. A young girl.
Your age or younger?
Younger.
Yeah.
I think in both cases kind of younger. There was only a couple years younger. A neighbor girl, when she was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, got cancer.
Wow.
And
you
that
watched
was,
her die?
well, I did not. I didn't watch her die. I might have seen her when she became ill. Mm-hmm. But I think there was, I don't know, just it was kind of hush-hush, even though everyone knew.
Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, a young man, just one day, he didn't wake up after his night's sleep, and I don't think they ever figured it out. Uh-huh. So my block had a few traumas. I don't know if
Death is everywhere.
Yeah.
You know the mustard seed parable?
No, I don't.
From Buddhism? A woman comes to Buddha and says to him, oh, my son has died, which is a terrible thing for mother's son to die. It's not the order that things should be. And she's distraught and asks him for some solace and advice. And he says to her, well, tell you what, I want you to bring me some mustard seeds. But you have to bring it from a house that has never experienced anyone dying. So she goes knocking on doors of neighbors, and everyone knew someone that died in their house, in their family. And finally she just gives up. There's nobody that she was able to find that didn't experience death in their family. And that was the lesson that was learned.
And yet it seems like in the United States today, we try to become very insulated from it. I think elderly people are, to a great extent, not. Maybe they're just now starting to live a little bit more with younger family members, but, for decades it seemed like they were, shunned away to nursing homes. Mm-hmm. And even, our food supply, I'm not a vegan, but so at one point in the 70s, we lived in Oregon on a farm, and we had some chickens for eggs, and every so often there was one very broody hen that every so often we wouldn't be able to not find her eggs for a few weeks, and then she'd come out of the woods with like 10 chicks behind her. Mm-hmm. And we kept all the females and we traded the males away, but every so often we didn't trade a male away and we ate chicken. Mm-hmm. And but now, people go to the grocery store and it's like so far removed from that.
Under saran wrap with styrofoam plates, and it's just pieces of things, not of animals anymore, right?
So, I feel kind of like it made more sense in a way. There were, hunting cultures, and that made a little bit more sense when you did experience everything, the whole giving of life, and I don't know, felt more of an obligation to use every part of any animal you killed, which, who knows now?
Well, generally, we eat the flesh and a few of the organs, but not very many of the organs. In nature, a predator goes for the organs first. Go for the stomach, the first thing. Carnivores eat vegetables when they're in the stomach of the herbivore that they're eating. It's the first thing they go for. It's a very interesting fact. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I should talk to my brother about that. He does like enteric, biology stuff. He bacteria in your digestive tract, and I don't know if there's something about the half digested vegetables that work. But
maybe this the fermentation that's going on. That's getting your probiotics.
Right. Or the alcohol. Maybe it's some kind of, I don't know, psychotropic effect.
Yeah. But okay, what you're getting on there is that people in our society, America today, are far removed from the fact that that's a dead animal on their dinner plate.
Right.
They don't want to acknowledge that there's death involved.
Right.
And when a child all of a sudden is illuminated, they often become vegetarians as children, when they make the connections that their parents never made the connections for them. If, on the other hand, they're fully aware of the connection, if they're hunters or farmers, that's fine. But it's the disconnection. I think that's where the problem lies. And so we are in a society where we do have animal rights activists trying to remind people with, there's picket signs or their placards on the street corner, this is death. Because people don't realize it, because they don't think about it otherwise.
I do wonder if it has an impact on how we all think about our own deaths, or death in general. It just seems very, far removed. And I know I kind of feel like, I know I'm not immortal, but, when I go through my everyday routine, I kind of don't think about any alternative to being immortal. So, so I was wondering to what extent, adding that awareness in the society was any kind of motivating factor in writing the book.
To tell you the truth, I really had no goal of trying to change anybody's mind about anything. I wrote it just for my own pleasure. And, for instance, when any author comes out with a book, especially, including when it's by a real, large publisher, they are obligated by the publisher to do promotion. When you self-publish, if you don't do any promotion, there is nothing going on anyway, for the book. That's even true with big publishers too. I did no promotion of this whatsoever, as opposed to Good Girls and Bad Drugs, when I went through all the steps. Just to give you one instance, I sent it to 20 different book review outlets, in the mail. And of course, gotten our reviews, and the day the book is officially published, all of a sudden, there's 20 used books for sale online.
Oh.
That's where all the review copies go to, right?
Wow.
So anyway, I didn't do any of that for Final Thoughts. When I sent out an email notice to just email, I'm not, Facebooky, just an email to my friends that got the book out, and you can click on this for Amazon, and here's my website page, and that's all. As opposed to like Good Girls and Bad Drugs or any other book, I'd say, oh, and by the way, please write a review for Amazon, or whatever. I didn't do any of that whatsoever, nothing. Just put it out and done. I'm finished. And that was my, it's been fulfilled. Just to give you an instance, mentioning Amazon, I was curious. One way that authors get a lot of Amazon reviews is by making the ebook of the book, publishers or authors and self-publishers, making the ebook of the book available to Amazon only for a certain amount of time. It could be 3 months, 6 months, a year. And then Amazon, anyone who's an Amazon ebook subscriber, I forget what it's called, Unlimited, something, Prime, not Prime. But anyway, if you're a subscriber to that particular feature in Amazon, you then have free access to all of these ebooks for free. If you put an author, you put it on that program, you get these people who are able to see your book for free, read it for free, and then maybe write a review. So the day the book's published, you already got 20 reviews there, right? I didn't do any of that for this. I was curious, will this ever get a review? And this was just really ironic. One person has reviewed it, okay? Just like this other self-published book
Oh,
here.
yeah.
One person reviewed this one, happens to be, I reviewed it of this, but anyway, I gave it 5 stars. The person who reviewed it, he never wrote a review before of a book. He gave it a 1 star. I said, oh wow, that's like the death knell. How appropriate.
Oh my God.
He gave it 1 star because he was expecting it to be an anthology of other people's writings, not just my own. So he came in with completely, false pretenses. He bought the ebook. When Amazon publishes books, the paperback is available, look inside, before publication, but the ebook is only available upon publication. All the people who look at the ebooks cannot see what the book is going to look like before publication. He ordered it before it was published, not knowing what it was going to be, just his preconception. It wasn't what his preconception was, and so he gave it a 1-star review.
And the little bits you have that are other authors are very small little jingles and poems and things.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of one, though. I don't know if you remember in the 60s, the guy named Pete Hine who wrote Grooks. They were little poems. And for a long time, I had a book back, I don't know, in the 60s or early 70s. And there's one, I actually wrote this down because he does one about death that reading your book reminded me of.
You had written it back then.
I just scribbled it because it's 8 lines.
Yeah.
And it's called, what is it called? The Cure for Exhaustion. Sometimes exhausted with toil and endeavor, I wish I could sleep forever and ever. But then this reflection, my longing allays, I shall be doing it one of these days. And I kind of remembered reading this during my teen years. I didn't remember all the words. I just remembered that it ended I'll be doing it one of these days, And of course, the internet being the internet, it's easy to find it now.
Yep.
He was sort of trendy for a while. He also designed road roundabouts that were not quite circular and not quite square. They were some mix, some rounded corner square that apparently made traffic flow better. So those were his 2 claims to fame, but he clearly didn't become extremely famous for either one.
And by the way, just backtracking about my promotion, I gave you the copy of the book because you had me on as a guest for Good Girls and Bad Drugs, and I figured, this is my thank you for having me on. Yeah. I had no inclination at all of thinking that you were going to invite me on for a show. This is your idea, not mine.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, I'll tell you, we always take a break during the summer, and then October, November, we always do politics. It's elections coming up, and we interview candidates. And then during the end of the year, people are thinking about charitable giving. So we talk to people who have well-meaning and nonprofits that do good work. And then after the first of the year, I always feel like I'm looking for something a little different from both of those things. And I just want to sit and chat about interesting things. So the Steve Fournier book, we actually know Steve. He lives in Hartford. He's been a Green Party candidate for Attorney General and and for Congress, I think at one point, maybe a decade or so ago. And I've read little essays of his. I've never read...
His rants, he calls them.
Yes, his rants. And I don't know, I guess I'll have to get him on to come down from Hartford and talk about his rants.
Well, okay, since this is Green Party related, why don't you, because you know it better than I, tell us his exact experience as a candidate and so forth in the Green Party.
He has not been involved with the Green Party for many years, probably a decade.
Okay.
But in the mid, 2005, 6, 7, he is an attorney. He has not always practiced law. I think he decided at one point in his life he'd rather work in a school cafeteria than as an attorney. So I think he didn't respect the law profession very much. But he ran for Congress, I want to say maybe in 2008 or 2010. And I watched a debate. He was in on the debates. They let him in, and it was John Larson was running, and the Republican was, I don't remember his first name, but Visconti, who I think might have been one of the Republicans who was vying for the Republican gubernatorial slot this past election 2 years ago, and Steve Fournier. And Steve was really, really pretty good, but this sounds so trivial, but so the three of them were on the stage, and I was watching the video of it, and I was so distracted by their hair. Because John Larson has this Kennedy-esque look, the really great hair, and Steve is just like a regular person, kind of thinning and normal looking.
Unassuming, yeah.
And then, very unassuming. And Visconti had the worst, most phony toupee you could ever imagine.
Oh, typical politician, yeah.
Well, and I think his day job was trash hauling or something. It's very Italian sort of mob politician kind of look. And it was a good debate, but I kept getting incredibly distracted by what each one's hair represented.
That's a strange thing. And strange that you should admit it.
It is, and I'm admitting it, I don't know before what kind of crowd, but yeah, so, and he also ran for Attorney General at least once. I think perhaps the year Cliff Thornton ran for governor, Steve ran for Attorney General. We ran a
2006.
We petitioned and ran a full slate of candidates for state positions. So I think it might have been that same year that Cliff ran, which is probably the year I met you, because
I was involved with the Cliff campaign,
and you were on his board. No, you were on.
Oh, yeah, I was part of Efficacy in whatever loose affiliation you could call it, right.
Yeah. I discovered Efficacy really by accident. I was part of the Peace and Justice Network locally in 2002, and the group was sort of mixed. It was a lot of us older hippie peacenik people who were mostly white people in their 50s and older, and then there were the younger people who were more often, Black or Latino, and there was a rift between the people who were just about peace and the people who said, well, we need justice. And so we had, in 2004, this peace group still had this sort of, not exactly a rift, but it was a tension. And so I invited some of the people in the group who wanted to talk about justice issues and the injustices in our society here to be on my show, and none of them could. Like, one of them was working at York. She had a state job. She said, I'll lose my job if I come on now. And another one had health problems. So each of them had there were like these three women, and each had a good excuse why, she couldn't do it. So I just thought, okay, I'll just try to find someone. And I found the Efficacy website, just doing an internet search of criminal justice reform in Connecticut. And I wrote this email, dear Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, I have this Green Party public access show. I think it was like June of 2005. And Cliff got back to me less than 15 minutes later and said, your timing is perfect. I'm going to New Haven tonight to talk to the Green Party about running for governor. And so he couldn't be on my show the week I wanted, but he was at a later date. And then I went, in the meantime, to some event that he was part of in Bridgeport. And I have to tell you, it opened like a whole new perspective for me to hear Cliff talking about drug policy.
Right. And he gives it a specific racial slant. So.
Oh, yeah, and he knows. I mean, he's definitely, lived that, experienced the downside, and so he actually was perfect for it. But I keep inviting him to come back down and be on the show again.
Well, I think he's retired.
He is.
I mean, he retired and then started Efficacy, but now he's retired from being retired. So,
yeah. So, but yeah, I feel like he was a huge influence on my views on drug policy. It happened also when I met him. I worked for Head Start, and I had a caseload of 12 kids, and 4 of them, this is like 3-year-olds, 4 of them had incarcerated parents. And the parents were incarcerated because of nonviolent drug crimes. And I thought, I know a lot of people, like white people who live in Salem and Old Lyme, who use drugs, and like their kids aren't orphaned by it. So like it was right in the middle of that I met Cliff. It's like, the pieces of the puzzle kind of went together. So yeah,
let's get back to this. Okay?
Yes, back to Steve.
Because of what you've just said, let me read you just one sample.
Sure.
Okay. First of all, just an introduction to this. So if you say he ran in 2006,
yes,
that's probably when I became, some recipient of some email list because I was involved promoting Cliff's campaign. So in 2007 was when he began his rants, which were these emails where he would write these very, very well-written, well-conceived, well-informed opinion pieces that you'd expect maybe in a newspaper, except he wasn't even bothering trying to get them published. He just would put them on as just an email, and then he would put them on his own website as well. So I was getting these rants, and that was the one single word title in the subject heading from him. And I was really impressed, so I stayed as, quote, subscriber. I didn't unsubscribe, in other words. And that went on until even this day. His most recent one, interestingly enough, coincidentally, was Memento Mori. No, that was the second to last one. Memento Mori, about going to funerals of friends of his. But anyway, so over the years, I was grown very impressed by his rants, and I would share some specific ones with friends, and maybe they would subscribe because, in fact, yes, I have a friend in Germany who subscribes to it because I had been sending her some.
Wow.
And she uses some of his rants sometimes for discussion she teaches English to Germans, and also she teaches German to Russians, but she would use some of his rants in her English class. Interesting. So anyway.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So
is any of his artwork in there? Because he paints as well.
I don't know. No, it's just text.
All the words.
Yeah, with a very poor cover. But so he finally compiled them all that were on his website, he compiled them into a book and self-published it. And he put it just basically verbatim, whatever he had written back then. He didn't revise anything, delete anything, which was, I think, an unwise decision. But anyway, so we have now in hand all of his rants up from 2006 till just a few months ago when this was published. And one of them just happens to be relevant to you talking about, this group Peace and Justice was called, right? Okay. Or it could be the Green Party as well.
It could.
Right? Okay. So, all right. Let me just read you as a sample. And I think this will give you a good, this is back in 2009, this one. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs. And I'll read you the first few sentences of each paragraph, not the entire thing, okay? Some of us are joiners. We believe that a group of people working together toward a common goal is more likely to achieve it than same people working individually. And since we're social creatures anyway, and like to be around one another, we might as well make good use of our affiliations and cooperate to produce big things. And he goes on some other stuff. Okay, paragraph 2. Some of us are skeptics. We believe that plans, policies, ideas, and other bits of wisdom need to be tested regularly, even beliefs of long standing held by great numbers of people. Skeptics raise objections. Skeptics dissent from the majority view and habitually take positions against accepted ideas. Some skeptics have doubts about the existence of God. Some see no future in democratic government or free enterprise. Okay, I'm skipping now. All right. Next paragraph. Oh, just one more sentence at the end of that paragraph. Skeptics tend not to be joiners. When they do join, they question everything. Okay. Next paragraph. And remember, I'm skipping a few things. Okay. Skeptics who join are activists. Here's where Green Party and you and everyone else comes in. Activists turn out for picket lines and public meetings and protest demonstrations. Activists think of themselves as representing others. When an activist turns out to protest the closing of a public library, he's out there for the multitudes at home who share his convictions but couldn't show up for one reason or another. Okay. Next paragraph. Meetings of activists tend to be dreadful.
He is so right.
Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. Are to be dreaded. Okay, that's what he said. Turnout is always disappointing. Arguments on trivial matters can take hours to resolve. Does he get it right or what? Okay. Skeptics are there to point out deficiencies of every kind. See how much progress is made in a group of people who are quick to notice deficiencies. Often, dissent leads to conflict, and constant conflict can scare new recruits and hinder organizing. Turnouts at meetings tend to get sparser and sparser. Sounds like the Peace and Justice splintering group. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We got 2 more paragraphs here. All right. It may be that activists are on a fool's errand. Considering the situation of war protesters in America. Consider the situation of war protesters in America. And he goes on. I'm going to skip the rest. And then on the last paragraph. This seems to be the story of the peace movement, the environmental movement, and all other movements. Nobody has come up with a way out of the frustrating cycle which can discourage and finally disable the individuals caught up in it. Activists are said to burn out. They don't. They just quit fighting, defeated.
Yeah, last night, a couple of young filmmakers who had spent some time at Ferguson and patched together a documentary about it.
Ferguson, what's that?
In Missouri, the
okay,
riots in Ferguson a few years ago. So they were there and they took other people's footage and put it together. And some of the conclusions they had, I can't say I was totally on the same page that they were on, but some of what they were talking about was very similar to some of Steve's ruminations about, the people who claim to represent the multitudes. And, this film was not kind to those people. And in the end, it was kind of like the energy just got sapped out of it.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I've been involved in other activist groups, never really Green Party except for Cliff's campaign. And yeah, most people I know who have been involved are all, quote, burned out, frustrated because of all the work involved and so little is actually accomplished. But on the other hand, I'm speaking perhaps very egotistically or not, I don't know. But I know that I have made two great differences in being an activist. And it's just me as a little small part of a very large movement is, number one, vegetarianism. I became a vegan in 1970 before anybody even knew the word. Not even vegetarians knew the word. My campaign was to make vegetarians into vegans because there were already enough people out there trying to make carnivores into vegetarians. Well, me and 1,000 other people, I think, have become very successful in publicizing the cause.
That's true.
I see the word vegan all over the place now.
Yeah.
Right? And now it's like just being vegetarian. You open a restaurant nowadays, very few open up vegetarian restaurants. They open up vegan restaurants. So I'd say that was a success, okay? And then medical marijuana, totally successful, right?
Well, I think the takeaway point isn't that people can't accomplish anything. People can accomplish things, but I don't know. Personally, I've kind of stopped going to weekend demonstrations. It doesn't seem like that's the way to get things done. And, one good way to keep from burning out is to just, do stuff that makes a difference maybe in a minor way, but that's tangible.
Well, you're doing it right now. This
Sure.
show, which has been going on for how many years
Since
now?
2004.
Okay.
So we've been doing that. And there are, little things, at the intersection of Green and Golden Street in New London, there's a painting.
Yes, on the...
and I'm part of the group.
That was a memorial for someone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's now a plaque on one of the buildings explaining it all. But a group of us gets together once a year and repaints it.
Because it's always over with the cars, it gets rubbed out.
Yeah, and snow and plows and all that just make it really, really challenging. And, Portland, Oregon
it's also
has
slightly raised, isn't it? There slightly.
Well, the road is there are arches and dips and everything. It's a typical New London road. But we had first, seen street paintings in Portland, Oregon. There are a ton of them. Well, they don't have as much snow as New London. So we had this great idea, but it really, we had no idea getting into it that it really needs to be maintained every year.
Even the whale has to be basically repainted every 10 years.
Yeah. Things have to, our climate is tough on things. Now, not that we're really running out of time, although we're down to maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I wanted you to talk about the back cover because we kind of went past that slide when we were going through them.
Okay, yeah. Well, one of the chapters in the book is about my suicide attempt, in which I was, at that time, I was going to be a painter. Now, if I'm anything at all creatively, I guess I'm a writer. I was painting in my studio, which was an attic apartment in the summertime. It's very hot. And everything literally turned black on me. So I decided, I got to leave, got to get out of this. The only thought that came to my mind was to escape the blackness, was to kill myself. So I did a painting first, which was that painting that's on the back cover. Okay, without the skull, of course.
We recognize that skull now.
Okay,
Yes.
Right. I overlaid the skull for the back cover, but so that painting was going to have been the second to last painting I ever did. It was quite successful, I think. It took only 2 hours to paint, and then I slashed my wrist, and then I painted a painting with my blood. That was going to have been the last painting. That was a terrible painting.
It is not in the book.
No, and that's just, the blood curdled, it started peeling off, and it turns black. It's not even red anymore, so I just threw it away. But anyway, so that painting is part of that chapter, which is about my suicide attempt, called, well, the subtitle is Story Without a Beginning or a Middle, Just an End. The title is Portrait of the Artist as a Young Corpse. I think that's pretty funny, but that's me. Anyway, everything is true in that chapter except for the last page, because I obviously survived. So,
were you really in danger of not surviving?
well,
Or
as I say in the last page, the wound was actually pretty superficial. It stopped bleeding on its own accord. So I was just weakened, more emotionally perhaps than even physically. That's all. But, you know, the actual act of slashing one's wrist and going into a shower, if I had a bathtub, I'd probably be dead, because you can immerse it in the water. And I had a shower with just running water over it. And the actual action of it all it's all part of that chapter. It's perhaps, you know, very dark, but there's this thing like Nietzsche feels, Birth of Tragedy, the first page. You know, of course I can't say as poetically as he does, but the whole point of our existence is to make subject matter for art, right? So I feel, you know, that was a great experience, only because I was able to turn it into a story which I never sought to publish anyplace else, and had written it years ago and rewrote it for this and published it here.
now in your book, and we only really have about another 2 minutes or so, you talked about some other brushes with death. I learned, you know, that you and I don't think we lived in Israel at the same time exactly, but almost at the same time. And you actually had some frightening experiences.
Well, the Israel thing, I went to a kibbutz and they asked me where would I like to work, and they told me the various duties there, and I was interested in bees and they had an apiary. Oh, I'd like to work in the apiary. He said, well, there's not an open there right now. There's one volunteer there. Volunteers are the people like myself or yourself will go and work there for a summer, let's say. And there were about 3 or 4 kibbutzniks that work in the apiary and maybe one volunteer. And when it's open, you can work there. I said, okay, fine. So I was there for 1 week and there was a Palestinian attack. And they came down from the Golan Heights. This was the border kibbutz. They came down from the Golan Heights, and the first thing they came to was the apiary. So they killed the people in the apiary, which were 3 kibbutzniks and then 1 volunteer. It would have been me if I was there. You know, it wasn't,
Wow.
but you know. Long story short, they were discovered soon after, and they were surrounded. This is a kibbutz where all the kibbutzniks, the males, will all carry their guns with them wherever they went. 1974, it's right after the 73 war. So they were found out, and they ultimately killed themselves with their own explosives.
Wow.
You know. So
I was just as close to the border, but it was a quieter border in the northwest corner. I think we're out of time. Thank you, Mark, for coming on the show. And, you know, I will loan this book out to people who want it. A lot of the stories are really great. And there are warnings, disclaimers for some of the ones that are less humorous and maybe a little jarring. I don't know if that's necessary or not, but I kind of appreciate it.
okay.
Knowing when to steel myself. I just wanted to ask you, very last thing, do you have any upcoming events or anything that you're going to talk about, your books or any?
I'm going to give us a microgreen demonstration. Oh, it's like after all this, we're talking about microgreens. I'm going to give a microgreen workshop at Southington Public Library. I think they schedule it for May or June. That's the next thing that I'm certainly aware of. I'm writing another book.
Well, maybe when it's out, come on back.
Okay.
And for all of you out there, we'll be back next week. Our guests are going to be from Out CT. It's going to be they'll talk about their Oscar celebration that's coming up in February, their movie night, to dress to the hilt for. So I'll see you next week. Thank you, Mark. And
thanks for having me here.
yeah, and have a great week, and we'll just keep on marching on.
All right.